Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating collection of stories. They're all pulled from one source. John Brooks's classic book, Business
Right,
Adventures.
the one Bill Gates recommended. It's legendary.
Exactly. It gives this amazing look back at key moments in, well, 20th century business history. We've got your material here, summaries, bits from the book, analysis.
Yeah, all sorts of stuff.
And our mission today is basically to guide you through it, help you pull out the most important insights quickly.
That's right. And what Brooks does so well, and what your sources really emphasize, is he goes beyond just, like, the balance sheets.
Hmm.
He digs into the real-life stories, the corporate screw-ups, the market drama, how people act under pressure,
Hmm.
all to find these lessons that honestly still hold up.
So it's not just old news.
Not at all. It's real wisdom about leadership, making tough calls, ethics,
Hmm.
and that constant tension, between making money and doing the right thing.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. One of the earliest stories Brooks covers, and one your sources focus on, is the Texas Gulf sulfur case.
Ah, yes, a landmark.
It's often seen as this classic example, exploring, well, the very murky world of insider information.
It really is fundamental to understanding kind of fairness in the markets. The basic situation, like the sources lay out, was that insiders at the company, they traded stock based on private knowledge.
Knowledge of a huge mineral discovery, right?
Exactly, a massive one. And crucially, they traded before anyone else knew about it, before the public announcement.
And that's where the legal storm started.
Yep. The sources detail how the trial really had to grapple with this question. Was it legal to trade on that sacred info?
Because some insiders might have just been making informed guesses, maybe?
Well, some could argue that,
Mm-mm.
but others, the sources name names like Coates and Lamont, were found to have traded specifically because they knew about the discovery, information nobody else had access to yet.
So the case really boiled down to a core legal question.
It really did. It forced everyone to ask, okay, legally speaking, when does information stop being inside information and become public? It sounds simple, but it's incredibly tricky.
And before this,
Before cases like Texas Gulf, insiders getting rich off privileged information, well, it wasn't exactly celebrated, but wasn't really questioned in the same way. It was almost like part of the deal. This case was pivotal. It drew a line.
so what are the lasting implications then? What did we learn from it?
Well, Texas Gulf just throws this tension into sharp relief, doesn't it? The drive for personal gain versus a company's ethical duties to the market, to its shareholders.
Right.
And the outcome, it definitely pushed things forward. It led to new rules, pushing for more transparency, more fairness in the markets, and that's vital.
For trust.
Exactly. For public trust, for the markets to even function properly, people need to believe it's not a totally rigged game.
And for you listening, figuring out that line between, say, making smart decisions based on public data versus actual illegal insider trading,
Mhm.
that's not just some dusty history lesson from the 60s.
Absolutely not.
It's still critical knowledge today, for anyone involved in the markets, really.
Okay, let's shift gears. Another incredibly dramatic story from Brooks, one your sources really dig into, is the saga of Clarence Saunders and Piggly Wiggly.
Oh, the grocery store guy. What a story.
It's wild, and while it ended in, well, financial ruin for Saunders personally,
Yeah, he lost big time.
he did. But the sources argue the lessons go way beyond just the failure itself. It's about his response.
His resilience.
Exactly. His resilience after that crushing defeat. He didn't just give up. He kept trying new things. It really highlights, adaptability, keeping that vision alive even when the physical thing is gone.
There's that phrase the sources mention about Piggly Wiggly after he lost control.
Oh, yeah. The body of Piggly Wiggly, but not the soul. It's so evocative.
What does that really mean?
Well, it suggests the stores, the physical assets they carried on. But the unique spark, the innovative spirit Saunders brought, his values, his vision that was the soul. And maybe that was lost or at least changed when he was forced out. It makes you think about what ownership and legacy really mean beyond just the assets.
And the crisis itself, the one Saunders caused by trying to corner his own stock, that had bigger consequences too, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The whole messy fallout from that Piggly Wiggly stock battle, it directly led to calls for major reforms.
To stop that kind of thing happening again.
Precisely. To boost market stability, curb manipulation. These events helped shape regulations aiming for a more transparent, fair trading environment on Wall Street. with actual oversight, things we still rely on today.
And tied into all this market craziness and risk, the sources bring up that old bit of advice from De La Vega.
Ah, yes. Never give anyone the advice to buy or sell shares.
Sounds a bit blunt.
It does, but there's wisdom there. The sources explain the reasoning. Markets are just inherently uncertain. So many factors.
Unpredictable.
Totally. So even if your advice is well-meant, based on solid info at the time, things can change on a dime and lead to losses. It's not just about avoiding blame. It's more about encouraging people to think for themselves.
Do your own homework, basically.
Right. Understand the market yourself. Don't
Yep.
just blindly follow tips, no matter how confident they sound.
So Saunders' story shows that really personal side of business struggles, the human drama, but the reforms afterwards show how one person's actions, one crisis, can actually change the whole system for everyone.
Exactly. And De La Vega's advice
Mhm.
about not trusting tips
Hmm.
feels pretty relevant today with all the noise online, doesn't it?
Definitely does. Okay, let's move on to Xerox. Another fascinating case. A company with just unbelievable early success.
Unprecedented, really.
But then, as the sources describe it, they seriously stumbled. And your material offers a pretty specific take on why.
It does. It acknowledges, the usual suspects, strategic mistakes, organizational problems they played a part.
Yeah.
But the core argument in these sources is that a really critical factor, maybe the critical factor, was management developing this very short-term outlook.
Looking just at the next quarter, sort of.
Kind of. And this outlook, the sources argue, was driven by, well, a flawed management control system. One that relied way too heavily on just a few simple numbers.
Interesting. Let's back up, though. Their rise in the 60s was incredible.
Astonishing. You start with the Haloid Company, Joe Wilson's vision, seeing how xerography could totally change office work.
Yeah.
And then Peter McCullough, the sales and marketing guy. A perfect team, really.
And they just plowed money back into R&D.
Relentlessly, they kept innovating.
Which led to the Xerox 914 copier.
The game changer. It just transformed everything. The sources have the number of sales went from, $32 million in 59 to over $1 billion by 68.
Wow. First U.S. company to do that in a decade.
That's what they say. Profits, employees, everything just exploded.
Right.
And you have to admire Wilson's guts, right? Taking the risk to build and sell it themselves when giants like IBM basically passed on it.
Yeah, incredible foresight. But then came the 70s.
Right. And Xerox started to look like a one-trick pony, totally dependent on those copiers. Peter McCullough, now in charge, he actually saw the future was digital, this architecture of information idea.
He knew they needed to change.
He did. And Jack Goldman, the research head, warned him the copier market wouldn't last forever.
But then they made some big mistakes.
Well, the sources point to that huge SDS acquisition in '69. Cost nearly $1 billion.
And it didn't work out.
Not really. The sources call it incompatible with McCullough's vision, a massive financial drain. Eventually written off McCullough's folly, costing over $1 billion in total. And the plan to link STS with PARC, their amazing research center, that fell apart too. Different cultures, different ideas.
Palo Alto Research Center. That's where the real magic was happening, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Xerox poured money into it, hired the brightest minds in computer science. They invented unbelievable stuff there.
Like what?
Laser printers, the Alto Personal Computer, which had a mouse, graphical interface, networking, years ahead of its time.
So, they had the future in their hands. Why didn't they capitalize on it? What went wrong?
According to the sources, the beginning of the fall of PARC starts around 1972. It was isolated, physically and organizationally. No real connection to the business side.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Kind of. And then a key shift. New execs like McCardell and O'Neill came in, bringing this management by numbers philosophy apparently learned at Ford.
So decisions based purely on cost, market share, profit, avoiding risk.
That's the picture painted. And crucially, they took away Jack Goldman's power to actually turn Perrier's inventions into Xerox products.
Okay, so the sources are really pointing the finger at this management by numbers approach as the root cause.
That's the central argument, yes. That Xerox's huge strategic blunders, fumbling the laser printer, totally missing the PC revolution that PRES basically invented.
Which Apple and Microsoft ran with later.
Exactly. And even neglecting the cheaper end of the copier market where competitors were eating their lunch. The sources argue all this stemmed significantly from that narrow, numbers-focused approach, and the measurement system behind it was just inadequate.
They were just looking at profit, ROI, the standard stuff.
Right, which, the sources say, is fine for managing products you already have in markets you already know.
But not for launching something totally new.
Exactly. It's terrible for that. Their system just couldn't measure the important stuff for innovation.
Like what?
Well, like potential market leadership in a new field, the power of having a groundbreaking technology, how innovation boosts your long-term reputation. Customer satisfaction with something revolutionary, the actual competitive advantage you get from inventing something first.
The intangible stuff.
Precisely. The vital, long-term, intangible factors. They weren't measured, so they weren't valued in the decision-making.
It sounds like that old saying, you get what you measure.
That's exactly the principle the sources highlight. They measured short-term financials, so they made decisions based only on that. They completely missed the potential sitting right there in Park.
And Park itself was just seen as an expense.
Pretty much. A cost center, not a strategic investment for the future. There was this massive communication vacuum. The Park researchers knew what they had, but management, using their limited financial lens, just couldn't see it.
Isn't there that famous story about Steve Jobs visiting Park?
Yeah, and realizing instantly what Xerox was sitting on and failing to exploit.
Why could he see it?
Well, the implication is he wasn't trapped by Xerox's internal measurement system. He saw the potential, not just the current ROI. What Xerox needed, the sources argue, was a whole different way to evaluate new ideas.
Like what? A different control system?
Yes, one designed for new products. It would need feasibility studies looking not just at, 5-year profit projections, but also at those non-accounting factors. Strategic fit, market leadership potential, reputation impact, competitive advantage. A much broader view.
Wow. Xerox's story is, a powerful cautionary tale. Really shows the danger of only looking at the easy numbers. And how crucial it is to have systems and leaders who actually value and try to measure innovation in the long game, not just the next quarter's result.
Absolutely. So when we look across all these stories, from Brooks Texas Gulf's insider trading, Piggly Wiggly's market drama, and Saunders' resilience, Xerox's innovation failure, what are the big, the timeless takeaways for anyone in business or just interested in markets now?
Yeah, what's the common thread? Why do these decades-old stories still resonate?
Well, Brooks's genius, and what the sources consistently pull out, is showing how fundamental human behavior is always at the core.
People making decisions, basically.
Right, with all our biases, ethical challenges, different leadership styles. That's the constant engine driving outcomes, or sometimes driving things off a cliff.
And decision-making itself is key. That contrast keeps coming up: long-term vision versus short-sightedness.
Definitely. Like Joe Wilson sticking with xerography versus the numbers-only approach that hampered Xerox later. That tension is everywhere in these stories.
Right. And we also see how the rules evolve.
Yeah, the relationship between business, markets, ethics, regulation, it's not fixed. It's always shifting. The changes after Texas Gulf and Piggly Wiggly show how scandals or crises force the system to adapt. Even the Federal Reserve structure Brooks mentions, that blend of public and private interest, shows that ongoing negotiation.
And qualities like adaptability, clear vision, like Saunders bouncing back, they seem crucial no matter the era.
They really do. And maybe the most practical lesson, especially clear from Xerox, is just how dangerous rigid systems and incomplete measurements are, especially when you're dealing with the new and uncertain.
You really do get what you measure.
It seems so. If you only measure profit today, you might completely miss building your profit for tomorrow.
So these aren't just interesting historical footnotes, they're really illuminating case studies of these fundamental forces: human nature, leadership, systems, ethics.
Exactly. And those forces are just as powerful and relevant in today's business world as they were back then.
Well, we've taken quite a deep dive here into your sources on John Brooks' business adventures. We've explored lessons from Texas Gulf, the wild ride of Piggly Wiggly, and that complex Xerox story.
Yeah, trying to unpack some invaluable insights from those corporate dramas.
And our goal, as always, was to help you quickly get up to speed and pull out those key, well-informed takeaways from the material.
And I think we've seen how these timeless themes, human nature, leadership styles, management systems, even how we define success, just play out again and again.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Before you go, maybe chew on this final thought. Perhaps the biggest lesson from all these stories isn't just what happened. It's how people made decisions, and crucially, what they chose to measure. So if you were starting something new today, leading a team, making a big call, how would you ensure you weren't falling into that trap? How would you measure not just the easy numbers, but the real, long-term soul of your vision?